I have had the pleasure to speak with and get to know all three guests in this episode to varying degrees. I respect them all greatly and appreciate the time they have dedicated to speaking about the topics that they have chosen and that which are so very close to their work and activism. Tomorrow in Berlin, an event is commencing called the Decoloniale. It is by chance that this episode is being released on the eve of that fantastic event, but I will dedicate this episode to the speakers, activists and organizers of the Decoloniale, and I wish them every success. My thanks again to Flora, Ademola and Esheru. Two and a mic clocking out. Enjoy.
Dung weche pek kuduelo mabiro etu under mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye etu under mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji etu under mic. Ola wachokre wabed piny biwawinje ero chako momit ndi and a mic podcast makende.
I'm joined today by three wonderful guests, which goes beyond the boundaries of two and a mic, of course, but I'm extremely happy to have all three of you here. So Ademola, Esheru and Flora, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to meet you guys.
Thank you for bringing us together, Zach. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Zach. Pleasure to be here. I can't wait to get in.
Yep, wonderful. Great to have you all with it. And just in case people have not had the opportunity of listening to each of you speak, we're going to do a little introduction and then people can get to know you a little bit more. So if we start with Ademola and also tell us which wonderful part of the world you're in at the moment, that'll be great.
Like I said, I'm calling from Lagos, Nigeria. So I'm a journalist. I'm also an accountant. So I juggle both of them together. And I think it's very important that Black people, especially those of us who have the skills, to enlighten, educate our people, is very imperative. It is an historical duty that we must, embark on this program, on this program of decolonization, So, I mean, that's what's up.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're very active on social media. Do you want to let people know where they can come and find you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on two places, just two. I'm on Twitter, Ogbeni Demola, and Instagram, Ogbeni_Demola. So those are the only two apps that I use.
Wonderful. Okay, I will put your hashtags in the podcast notes so that people can come and find you. And you mentioned you're also a journalist and you do work with the Pan-African Review. Is that correct?
Yeah. We used to have some engagement. We do have some engagement.
Yep, wonderful. A fantastically expansive publication. I've read a few of the articles there. I always find them enlightening. So great work that they do, Ademola, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure is mine.
Esheru, we've spoken quite often recently, so at least I know you very well. But maybe for newcomers, you'd like to introduce yourself as well?
Absolutely. The name's Esheru, based in London, UK. I am social commentator, stroke political activist, and a Pan-Africanist. I love my Black people wherever they may find themselves. I share in the struggles and also the happiness and the positive sides as well. In my spare time, when I'm not tweeting and what's the best way to put this? Annoying people that wanted bigoted views of the world. I work at something called the African Federation, which is quite a new project. It's in its infancy. I mean, what we do, we've looked at Africa and we realize that there's a second gold rush happening on the continent, and many of us in the diaspora are losing out to some of these big organizations and companies across China and India and the US, etc. And we're trying to link small to medium-sized African companies with businesses here in this part of the world, whether it's here in Britain, Canada, and the US, to try and at least open some trade. So that's what I do in the spare time. Yep. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great to hear. Flora, are you with us?
I'm with you. Always
Wonderful.
with you, Zach.
Fan.
Never
Love
doubt
to,
that.
love to hear it. Love to hear it. Yeah. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I term myself as a passionate conservationist. I love my work in conservation. I'm a small scale farmer as well, and I love to build bridges and linkages to this or that or the other to procure that between NGOs and donors. So I'm a fundraiser. AKA resource mobilization. So that's where I am at. My background is in fundraising mainly, but also I have taught mathematics in an earlier life.
Yeah, fantastic. And we did a really great podcast where you talked about your work while you were at African Parks and the amount of fundraising that you did for that fantastic organization and the important work that they carried out indeed for the parks themselves, but also for training and protecting the rangers. Lots of great work that you did there.
Yeah, I've moved on. Now I am doubling in, supporting different other organizations as well, but staying in conservation.
Fantastic. And conservation is happy to have you. Yeah, great. Lots of interesting, and different sectors there which have been covered. So that makes it an even more diverse group than I had initially thought. So I'm even happier than I was a few minutes ago. And I was very happy a few minutes ago. So I'd ask you, each of you, to think about a topic which is of interest to you and that we could engage in. Somewhat spontaneously, so it's a bit of a different format to what we normally do, where we, all do our research and preparation and so on. If I can start with Ademola, what topic do you want to invite us to engage in today?
I'm thinking of so many topics at the same time, but I think I've pitched my tent with the issue in Congo, right? So I think the issue in Congo is the most underreported crisis that we have in Africa. I mean, it's a large-scale humanitarian disaster that is happening right at the heart of Africa. As Dr. Kwame Nkrumah will say, it says Congo is the heart of Africa. And if anything happens to the Congo, something is wrong with Africa. So when you look at the issue of Congo, from the pre-colonial period, when we had the Portuguese colonialism, we had King Leopold, when he acquired Congo as his personal property in the Berlin Conference in 1884. In Berlin, very, very recently, the state of Germany was just recently formed in 1871. That was when the amalgamation happened that we had Germany. So Germany was voracious for colonies, because it did not participate in the slave trade. So it was very voracious and vampiric in his chase of colonies. So that was why we had the Berlin Conference in Germany, and where European powers simply just sat together in an obscure place in Berlin and shared Africa amongst themselves like a box of pizza. So, and the problem reverberates 150 years later, 200 years later. We still have this problem because the architecture of colonialism, the architecture of imperialism still remains. And I think it's a bit naive that people say, oh, Ademola, colonialism is a thing of the past. Can you just forget it and move on? But look, we have the architecture of colonialism that was laid down over 500 years ago and still reverberates into our future. And that's why we have the issue of class struggle, we have the issue of race struggle, economic struggle in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So this takes me back to the issue in Congo. The issue in Congo now is a question of leadership, right? And like I said, there's a coordinated, attack on progressive leadership in Africa. So you see, this collectively uninspiring leadership that we have in Africa today is carefully structured by some men in Washington, D.C., by some men in Berlin, by some genocide defending people in Berlin. And, I think it's very important that people, come quite to this light. And you can remember in 1961 when Belgium, which is always found at the crime scene, in collaboration with the grand imperialist country on earth, the United States of America, and some other rogue nations came together and executed one of the finest and most progressive leaders Africa has ever, been fortunate to have, which was Patrice Lumumba. He was executed for the singular purpose of expelling international and multinational business interests who are living on the corpses, on the backs of the people, who even divided the country and were struggling for wanted to balkanize the country to acquire mineral resources. It will interest you to know that many of the weapons and the raw materials that was used by the Allied forces to defeat Nazi Germany in the Second World War, the raw materials were gotten from the Congo. The raw materials were gotten from the Congo. So now this brings us to the issue. The issue is multinational business interests struggling for economic dominance in Congo, and thereby interfering in the internal affairs, the politics of the country. So this takes us back to 1994, the Rwanda genocide against the Tutsi. We remember in 1994 when the Tutsis were genocided. It was like a second world war in Africa. It was one of the most humanitarian crises that has ever happened. Over 1 million people were killed in 3 weeks. With the support of France, because the government which coordinated the genocide was supported by France. And when the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Forces, led by General Paul Kagame, led the troops and defeated the genociders, the people that were committing the genocide, defeated them. The people who were committing genocide were exfiltrated, thanks to France. They were exfiltrated through an operation called Operation Turquoise. They were exfiltrated into the DRC. To interest you to know that the DRC shares the border with Rwanda. So these people, these genocidal war criminals, were exfiltrated into the Congo, and now they have regrouped, they have rearmed, they have regrouped under a name called the FDLR. So the FDLR is a genocidal outfit that is operating in the Congo, which enjoys the diplomatic support of the Congolese government. The problem in Congo now is we have many business interests. We have Israeli business interests, many mining companies. Congo has a lot of mineral resources. So we have many mining companies, Israeli mining companies. We have American mining companies, Chinese mining companies. They have taken over the country to such an extent that the sovereignty of the country is in question. The sovereignty of the country is in question. So it will interest you to know that you see all these child labor that you see on the internet, all these the garrisons, displacements, the expulsion that we see on the internet about what's happening in the Congo. Many of these have been orchestrated by this international business interest. So, like Dr. Kwame Nkrumah described the problem in Congo, he said, the problem in Congo is foreign influence in an independent African state. So this brings us into question the central government of Congo. What is the government of Congo doing to make sure that the mineral resources in Congo is being used to satisfy the economic wants and desires of the people? There is no reason and there is no excuse that Congo, which is arguably the richest country on earth in terms of mineral resources, right, as one of the poorest people on earth. It is a paradox that I have not brought myself to understand. And like I said, the cause of this problem is foreign influence, foreign intervention in an independent African state. The only way to solve the problem that is happening in Congo right now is for the leaders in the region to come together and disarm the FDLR that is enjoying diplomatic immunity, diplomatic support, and terrorizing and oppressing Tutsi communities, Rwandophone communities inside the Congo. It will interest you to know that in Congo we have the Banyamulenges, we have the Rwandophone communities, we have the Tutsi. There's a Tutsi community inside Congo, and the FDLR, with its antecedent of genociding the Tutsi in Rwanda, has started to replicate these genocide actions inside Congo, oppressing the Banyamulenges, and that is why we had another military outfit that was formed, M23, that is countering the terrorist activities of the FDLR. So it is very important that African leaders come together and pull themselves to task of putting an end to the problem happening in Congo. it's interesting to know that when the problem happened in 94 and the genocide, the people that committed the genocide, they fled to a lot of places in East Africa. They fled to Rwanda, they fled to Uganda, they fled to Tanzania under the leadership of Julius Nyerere. Julius Nyerere actually disarmed those genocide committing criminals and returned them to Rwanda, and the refugees, he returned them back to Rwanda. And this is the kind of leadership that we want in Africa. Africa should not be a place where foreign powers wrestle over mineral resources, because that is typically what is happening in Congo. We have foreign business interests, fighting over mineral resources, while Africans are the one carrying the brunt. Because you see, we use the iPhone, we use all this technology. We don't know that they are coming from the sacrifice, the death, the corpse, the labor, the pain, the struggles of people who, actually own the land of the Congo. So I think it's very important that people have this enlightenment about what's really happening. I think that's really what's up. And if it could interest you to go to the Pan-African Review and read various articles that they have written about the crisis in Congo for more enlightenment, because I think the issue in Palestine, the war on Gaza, has taken over the algorithm, and we no longer see what's happening in Sudan. We no longer know that people are being ethnically cleansed in Sudan by the RSF. We no longer know that there's an issue going on in Haiti. The America and our fellow rogue nations are about to, and they are with their puppet client state in Kenya, are about to dispatch, or they've dispatched a bunch of police officers to destabilize Haiti for the same reason: secure foreign business, economic interest. So I think that it is very important that we as Black people also focus on our issues. We should use our platform to talk about our issues. I think that's what's up.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Ademola. I don't think I've nodded so much in such a short period of time from all the things that you said. One point that I forgot to mention when I was introducing everybody was Flora's brother is an artist in Nairobi City, and he was the person who created the jingle for this podcast. Omission Jazz is the name of the artist, and so in Kenya, and we've spoken a bit about this. And there, Ademola also mentioned the force which the president sent to Haiti, was forced to send to Haiti. Some people are likely to say. Flora, do you have any thoughts on that point, or indeed in general about what Ademola said?
Might be contentious what I'm about to say, but I always link it to something as simple as when I buy coffee here, my coffee is probably grown in Kenya, but it is ground in Germany. And Kenya is not able to grind its own coffee. They're forced in the world market to export coffee beans at a much cheaper price for countries here in the West to grind it and sell it back to Kenya at quite some crazy prices. As in, Kenya has no negotiating, or very little negotiating power, because it's indebted to so many countries. It's indebted to the US, it's indebted to China, it's indebted to all this post-colonial legacy of being indebted, of not being able to support its own budget and getting funds from here or there. And we can talk about that later when we talk about examples like Kagame, who has really reigned his own markets and GDP and income. But when we look at why Kenya had to send forces to Haiti, he was just cavorting to the US. He's cavorting. Our president is not able to rein his own and say, okay, I have my own problems in my own country. I'm having the country is at a standstill. They were about to call, or rather, we were at a standstill with all the protests that were going on. The government was almost persona non grata from its activities, but he still went. The president still went to the US and committed, forces to Haiti. Why? And I ask myself, why? We are cavorting to the whims of the West. Well, we could actually reign together, which is why, everybody who calls for Pan-Africanism, let's hold together stronger. Let's be a force that says no to such. I still am very, very strong believer of, when we hold hands together, when we are more Pan-African in everything that we do, and that we are we look at us with pride, and we're not bowing to whichever whims because we want to impress this or that or the other. We might actually move forward. There might be progress in the continent.
Fantastic. Thank you, Flora. And your typical emotion, which I absolutely adore. Esheru, any thoughts? You are nodding as vociferously as I was on a podcast. Nobody can see that, but I can see it.
Absolutely. A couple of things I wanted to pick up on. I think going back to Ademola's some things he was saying, I just wanted to just add some context that one of the reasons why the cycle continues is simply because a lot of these African leaders, the wealthy African leaders, the puppet leaders who do the West's bidding for them, they end up sending their children to British and American educational institutions to educate themselves, to go to the top institutions. At these institutions, they then become friends, associates, and colleagues with the children of the leaders of the countries that are exploiting the country they're coming from. Do you understand me? So they become friends, and this chain of this cycle continues. One of the things that African nations should be looking to do is building their own institutions. The technology is there, the education is there. I mean, people travel to Timbuktu once upon a time to buy books to read. They used to come from the forest field as Arabia and certain parts of southern Europe to buy books. It used to be the epicenter of wealth and knowledge at a period in time. So, this is something that needs to be recreated on the continent to keep people at home. That's one of the biggest problems. Okay. Secondly, resource-rich African nations, they've been designed for two things, and this is the legacy of colonialism: extraction of raw materials and then the export. That's it. There's nothing in between. Okay. Zach and I was talking a few weeks back, and I read a very good piece on Burkina Faso and Niger. And Niger is rich in uranium and cobalt. Burkina Faso has cobalt. They wanted to extract the material, set up a manufacturing plant to manufacture batteries for electric vehicles. And the US told them that they couldn't do it. Joe Biden said to stop to it. So here we are. We start with the raw materials here. We've got an abundance, and we want to build it, create jobs to build our economy. But a third party is telling us we can't do it. And the simple fact is this: when African nations, or any nation, developing nation or underdeveloped nation, is in a process of lending money in order to fund projects within their country, as we know that they do with the IMF and the World Bank, there are often strings attached to that. One of the strings attached in that instance was that they weren't allowed to set up any companies that competed with US companies. The IMF, the UN, the World Bank, they're all headquartered in New York, right? This isn't by accident. This is by design. This is in order for New York and Washington to be able to control what's happening on the continent. And my third and final point, I think, as I said, Africa has, I believe, something like 70% of the continent, and please correct me, 70% of the continent has an age, I believe, all of the age of 30. I mean, just that alone, the resource alone of that it's unheard of nowhere else on the planet. It's the youngest continent on the globe. That resource itself should be something that people are looking towards and saying, look, let's throw money at these people. In fact, no, people shouldn't be looking for money. The Africans should be saying, look, let's do for ourselves, because Africa doesn't need the world. The world needs Africa. This exploitation happens purely because all these large organizations, whether they find themselves in the West, whether they find themselves in China, an industrialized nation that wants resources that come out of Africa, okay, will exploit it as much as they possibly can. So Africans have to say no, as Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso. He's being brave and he's saying, no, this is ours. Niger, Mali, this is ours, and we're going to try and do for ourselves. And what we will then see happen is simply this. Eventually, Africans will stop buying European cars. They'll stop sending their children to European schools, stop buying European fashion labels, stop buying European fragrances, stop buying European apartments, and being proud of what we have here and build on the existing. Yeah, I think that was just my introduction. What I really wanted to talk about, and it ties into what I'm saying. I wanted to talk about the way that subsidies hurt the African continent. Do you guys know about the rice crisis that they had in Ghana some years ago, back in the 80s? Yeah, it's a very, very good. I mean, this is for our listeners, of course. It's such a very good example of how loans hurt the economy. So, in the early 80s, Ghana wanted money from the IMF for various agricultural projects within the country. So loans from both the IMF and the World Bank meant they could get the money, but some of the strings attached was that they had to basically liberalize their markets to allow cheaper or imported goods to come in. Now, as we know, that Ghana itself produced a lot of rice. It was able to feed itself and some of the surrounding countries, a hell of a lot of rice. But due to the loans that they were taking and liberalizing the market to allow cheaper products to flood in, what happened was that American rice was being able to flood the Ghanaian market. Now, we have to understand is that the IMF, the World Bank, and the internal banks in the US allow the US government to heavily subsidize their farmers. And subsidies happen everywhere, whether it happens in Europe or the US, it doesn't matter. They subsidize them to such a level that they're able to export it and sell it at a higher price than it's sold at home. But because the quality is better, people rejected the Ghanaian rice and bought the American rice and literally crashed the Ghanaian rice industry. Now, it isn't just the rice, it's the knock-on effects, right? You've got the secondary and the tertiary industries that are associated. Everything from making the bags that the rice go into, that's the industry. Printing the bags for the rice to go into, this is an industry. So hundreds of thousands of people are literally put out of work over the short period of time. And this is where I believe that African nations need to be more independent. Stop focusing or stop taking these loans from these wealthy nations and do for themselves, because they don't need to do it. They have everything right where they are. But they have to come together in a union and decide that they're going to no longer accept what's on offer and do it for themselves. I believe Ibrahim Traore refused an IMF loan very recently. I'm not sure, I can't remember what it was for, but I remember the last person that did that ended up dead. So, I mean, I hope that this guy's stays safe. But refuse what they have on offer and work for yourself. The technology is available. The brains are there and the resources are there. Bring people in and build.
Thank you, Eshru, for that topic pick of yours. That also ties in quite a bit with conservation, which I have a feeling Flora might address in a moment or two. But just to bring Ademola back into it, Ademola, do you have any thoughts on the issue of Ghana, but also indeed of how foreign intervention can completely destroy local markets in African nations, which kind of ties in with what you were saying as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think Eshiru has said a whole lot of brilliant stuff that I really agree with. Personally, I think one of the most useless leaders that we have in Africa is the president of Ghana, who willingly, voluntarily serves the foreign interest of his masters in Washington and London and Paris, while his people are occupying the street, demanding for an improvement in their economic growth. So, and if you look at what is happening in the Sahel, I think it's very important that Black people, like I said this afternoon on Twitter, the United States is not a blueprint of what a democracy is. A democracy just literally means the people being in the driver's seat, driving the destiny of the country. And this is not the case in the United States. I mean, we can see that the United States has been completely hijacked by some people behind the scenes, and the president himself is just the public relation officer of the actual government. So we can't call the United States democracy because it's not serving the interests of the people. It is an elitist bourgeois dictatorship. Whether it is the Democrats, whether it is the Republican, you get a genocide. So I don't think it is important for Black people to be deciding which of the genocide is better. Is it the genocide that comes with the rainbow flag or the one that comes bland? So I don't think the United States itself is a democracy. And I don't think they have the moral authority to describe or enforce what the democracy is. So looking at and juxtaposing with what we have in the Sahel, we can see that the Sahel, especially in Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, we can see that there is a grassroots mass involvement in nation building. It's not just a bunch of obese, greedy, corrupt leaders who are occupying the streets and the offices in Ouagadougou stealing money. I mean, that is not the case. I mean, it was the case some 27 years ago when we had Blaise Compaoré ruling for 27 years with the support of France. But that is not the case today. We are seeing the people in the driver's seat. I mean, this has been, I think, the 9th assassination attempt on Ibrahim Traore. And we observe that anytime there's an intervention by France through its proxies to topple the government in Burkina Faso, the people actually embark on vigils. They occupy the streets, they stay outside, and make sure that the government is intact, the president is safe, and everything is functioning well. And that there's nothing that is more democratic than that. There's nothing that is more democratic than that. I think it is important for there to be a rewiring in our education, and we should stop getting our handouts from Washington, Berlin, Genocide Berlin, that is currently funding another genocide the 3rd time. I think it's very important for us to determine what political system suits our reality, given our historical, religious, cultural, and economic realities. It is on that basis upon which we can decide and determine what system actually suits us. I think that's really what's up.
I love the fact that you never pull punches, Ademola. I'll tell you, if people want to really read bare, hard opinions about what is happening on the continent of Africa, you are definitely one of the people to follow for that, as are indeed the other guests here today. Flora, so your topic pick.
Thanks. Actually, I have a topic. I want to segue it into something Ademola said. But first of all, let me get back to Ghana, my sister country, Ghana. And now I'll inject some conservation, but only at this point because I'm talking something completely different. My topic is actually completely different from conservation. But I just want to also talk about Ghana. I was there 2 years ago, and I decry what fast fashion has done conservation-wise to Ghana. As you know, and I'll just try to give an example of how fast fashion has destroyed the environment completely or almost completely in Ghana and most of our countries, because I do know that Kenya also does import used clothing from the West. So what happens is here in this country, so consumers give their t-shirts to whichever charities. You put it in the box, you donate it. Charity shops only sell up to 20% of those donated clothes. Now, Ghana is one of the world's largest importer of used clothing, and I was in Kantamanto in Accra. It's largest. I think it's the world's largest second-hand clothes market. At all, forget about our countries, even Nigeria or Kenya or South Africa. So what happens is those unsold donations are sold for profit. Aggregators who package those clothes in bales for export. So traders in our countries pay on average, I don't know, $100 per bale, like a huge bale. But a lot of that is trash. All the trash that is fast fashion, which is really cheap, really, really terrible quality plastic. Most of it is plastic. About 40% of what somebody buys in a bale, you never know what's coming in that bale. So traders buy these huge bales. 40% of it is waste. And I was reading that almost 100 tons or something towards 100 tons of this unusable clothing ends up in landfills, illegal dumps or landfills. And I cried when I saw Odawa River. It's completely choked with trash, clothing, trash from the West. Every time I see somebody donating or putting clothes in one of this donating box, I want to tell them, please don't do this. You're hurting my continent. But of course, I do not know who is going to take on this if it's not the green parties in these countries of ours. Who's going to take on this and try to save the environments out there? Well, that is what I want to say. What the West and what is donation and how it has killed the textile industry. We had a very vibrant textile industry. When you talk about Thomas Sankara, he ensured that on 1 day a week, everybody had to dress up in the traditional clothing, which was only done traditionally. You got the cotton. We were planting cotton. We were one of the biggest exporters of cotton. The continent was, and the clothing industry was vibrant. It was one of the major, for the GDP. Cotton exports or clothing export was one of the greatest contributors to the GDPs of quite a number of the countries, and that's gone. That's gone because of the stupid fast fashion. Sorry, I get very passionate because I'm just seeing that trash and seeing those landfills. I'm going to take a breath, and then I go to my topic, which is I run, as you know, Zach. My next project is a huge running project, and on the 5th of September of this year, we had a very dark day, a very dark and sad day, when the Olympian Ugandan Rebecca Cheptegei was murdered, or femicide, by her ex-boyfriend. And for me, being the female voice here, and I'm thinking we do not talk about this enough, and with sort of a topic which is created. Yes, we're very passionate about politics, and this links to politics in some way, but when we talk about gender-based violence, and we're talking about it globally, but also talking about it in the continent. And here is where I also want to bring a segue into what Ademola said. We're talking about coloniality, and I have read quite some bit of works from this woman called Maria Lugona, who came up with the concept of coloniality of gender. And I look back to our continent and looking at the history of the continent, and even Southern and Eastern Africa, where women in pre-colonial Africa were really active in the public domain. They were the holders of, or controlled the technology of agriculture, which is what was the mainstay of economies. The powerful spiritual roles. Women were set in such high regard and such high standards, and then that is eroded over time. And you're seeing, and I read, I think I'll put up some links as well, that from countries that were colonies are 50 times more likely to have prevalence in partner violence against women than countries that weren't. And that tells you a lot from the shift from the role that women had, and post-colonial or colonial, during the colonial rule, and post-colonial standing of women, how women are treated, the coloniality of gender, where the woman woman's role is one of a subjugated role to the one of men, and the violence against women, especially since they were the ones who are holding some of the power. As we went through the colonial period, they were targets, so the role of women, and again, it's not only in our countries. I mean, we're looking at currently, the data is that 82% of women across the globe, across all the continents, 82% of women in power, in political office, experience psychological violence, experience sexist or quite humiliating sexual or mobbing, or it's across the world, but more so in our continents. And this is one of my passionate topical areas. I want to speak about it. I want to make it be discussed. I want to make it be known, and also encourage ourselves in our continents to ask ourselves, what happened? Could we not take a look back at where we came from and say that what happened along the path? Hasn't it changed the way that we view, or the way that society views women now? But should it really be? Should we lose what we had before, where women had a lot of respect, and they carried a lot of the continent on their shoulders in the sense of progress, in the sense of industrialization? And that is ideally, this is my topic. I listened to Josina Machel, who's a human rights activist, and she's the daughter of Samora Machel, the first independent president of Mozambique, and also Nelson Mandela being a stepfather and all. She has experienced gender-based violence, and she's a very vocal voice. And she also, tries to look at what has been the progress over time, and she analyzes it in quite an interesting way. And I'm hoping that there will be more such prominent voices that can be heard across the globe, not only just continents that are taking on this very, very key topical area. And now we're talking about tech facilitated violence across the globe, yes, but I'm looking more at our continent and our countries where they have statistics from Uganda and from Kenya, where they say about 48, 49, almost half of women have experienced online harassment. And here comes my link again to conservation, climate change and violence against women, and why this is again a global issue. We see an example such as Nepal, with an increase in women and girl trafficking after the 2015 earthquake. We're seeing in Ethiopia a rise in early marriage whenever there is drought, and just because of tradition and how women are married off, or rather sold off. We're seeing an increase in early marriage of girls, really young kids being sold off or exchanged for livestock whenever there is a drought. And this is I look at what climate change has done. Not only that, when we look at other global phenomena, such as what happened during COVID and when people had to isolate and be at home, and the increase in gender-based violence that happened during the time. That is, I come back to conservation, why we have to also address, when we're talking about climate change, let us address this. Let us address how this affects, or how this increases, or there is quite a strong connection between climate change and gender-based violence in a number of our countries. But I know this is a bit of a downer, but it has to be talked about. So back to you, Zach.
I've had conversations with Esru and Ademola, and from what I've also read of a lot of the tweets that they've put out there in the past as well, all of us are feminists, strong supporters of women in politics, in business, in leadership, in every way. And so you will only find support from this group of individuals, Flora, and I'm extremely happy that you raised the point. Esru, you want to say something?
I'm just saying that I wholeheartedly agree with everything Flora says. I think that the continent itself used to, I think, put women more at focus than they did before. And I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but colonialism ended a lot of that. We saw that women having to take more traditional roles. And I say traditional roles, I say that in inverted commas, housewives and moms, etc., etc. When it was more or less the opposite to that 150, 200 years ago, which is something, I guess, again, many people don't realize or even talk about, because they never think about the intricacies of the damage that colonialism done to the continent.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Ademola, anything to add?
I have a lot of things to add, but I think I'll just reserve them for the next podcast, because if I bring them in, we'll not live here.
Wonderful. Okay, great point. And that also is a good reminder to me to get things moving a bit more quickly, because I did actually want to ask each of you to recommend a book to read. And what I'll do, just to speed things along, when you recommend a book to read, can you also add what projects you've got up and coming, and where people can find you? And then I can also add all of this to the podcast notes. So if we start with Ademola.
Yeah, so Flora talked about, I think it's very obvious that Flora is a feminist. And I personally love feminists because I am one too. As a leftist, I embrace feminism. So yeah, I think it's important to read this work, Women's Liberation and the African Freedom Struggle by Thomas Sankara. And I can see that Flora is our Africa's Greta Thunberg. I think she's very passionate about climate justice and climate change. So I think it's important to read The End of Oil by Paul Middleton, that talks about climate change, the way forward. So, and I've got my own podcast coming soon in a matter of weeks. So it is Ubuntu, the African Perspective, what you didn't know about the slave trade. So we shall be inviting the author of the book, A Slave Ship Called Jesus. So we shall be dissecting Dele Ogun. Dele Ogun is a barrister and is an historian and a UK-based lawyer. So we shall invite him to the podcast. He shall be dissecting all the ambiguities surrounding the Atlantic slave trade, the lies, the half-truths, and everything surrounding it. So I think, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. And I look forward to listening to all of these other points that you will raise in our future podcast, Ademola. Esheru, what about you? What's your book and your future projects, please?
Okay, absolutely. There are two books actually. The first one is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. It's an old book by a guy called Walter Rodney, but it's still very relevant. Every 3 or 4 years, he gets an update. I think it was written in 1977 initially, but it's still being updated now. The latest update, I believe, is 2022. So it's still very relevant, and I think people need to understand the context as to why the continent is the state it's in, instead of just simply saying, or the lazy way of putting it is saying, because Africans are not intelligent and African leaders are corrupt, it's very lazy. They need to understand the intricacies of why. And secondly, the other book is a book called African Women, Patricia W. Romero. Again, as I said, before the British actually went into Africa, the continent itself, women were hunters, they were gatherers, they had less than traditional roles. They did more or less what the men do. And I guess when we look at Rwanda, and we touched on political representation being the highest in the world, higher than most of the developed nations, and that tells you a lot about what African women were doing once upon a time, and which was completely broken down by colonial power. So I definitely recommend those two for a read. Secondly, I'm working on a few projects on the side. These are a couple of podcasts of which are coming out in the very near future. I'm sure you can leave my handle in the chat. Yes, okay. Well, people can catch me there and pick up updates on Twitter, or what was formerly Twitter but now X. Thank you.
Thank you, Esheru. And Flora, how about you?
Following that, and also my topical area, there's one I would like to recommend to all my girls out there, and boys and everyone in between, The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls by Mona El-Tahawi. It's like she's very bold, very uncompromising. It's almost like a manifesto to inspire girls to defy, disrupt, to be powerful, destroy patriarchy, just challenge anything they've been trained, society is trying to train them to. So that I would like to recommend. And I'm almost having like something like a tabula rasa in front of me. Like, what am I going to do next? There's so many things coming up my way, and I'm trying to use the time to focus myself towards one or the other. But in the meantime, I'll be running. If anybody is interested in that and running with me, please reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you, Flora, as well, for your wonderful passion and insight as well. And indeed, all of you, Ademola, Esheru, Flora, all together. I'm so grateful that we managed to come together. Everybody's in 3 different countries represented here, but a unified passion, unified perhaps mission. And so I appreciate that from all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for having us, Zach. And it was great to bring us together. It's quite diverse, but also so many linkages and what we talk about. So
thank you very much, Zach. Thank you very much, Flora, for the insightful contribution. Thank you very much. I mean, we agreed on a lot. We agreed on a lot of things. I mean, from Burkina Faso to the Sahel, everything that's happened. I think this is a group of people with like minds, and I think that we are the vanguard of the revolution, and things like this should happen as frequently as possible, because education is the vanguard of the revolution, right? So we must educate our people. So we're the intellectuals, the vanguard. We have the historical duty to educate and ultimately liberate our people. So yeah, thanks, Zach, for coordinating this.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you all.
I can't think of a better way than to finish an evening on a high.
And a mic.